Dear students, welcome to Darasa Online. The lesson is on prosodic features. These prosodic features are under the subtopic of speaking skills, which they are in the major topic, which is language skills. Yeah, so as I said, the lesson today is about prosodic features. Prosodic features, they are meaningful features that a person has to observe when he or she is speaking. Why do you have to observe them? We have to observe them because we want to make our message being communicated. Because it is through these features that can make an utterance be understood. We are going to have a guiding question that will help us to understand what are these prosodic features. And the question goes, how can a speaker make his or her utterance understood? And another question reads, how can a writer make his or her written work understood? You might be asking yourself a question of, why do I have to have this second question while our topic is to do with speaking? I made this question purposely so that at the end of the day, we should be able now to know that when we are writing, what are the features that you have to look at? Why do you have to use them? But today, we are specifically going to look at how can a person make himself or herself understood before others when he or she speaks. So the features we are going to look at are, one, we look at the pause. We look at length. We'll talk about stress. And finally, there will be intonation. So, Why should a person pause? How can a person discriminate sounds? Or how can a person discriminate sounds when he or she speaks? Why stressful? And how important is it that a person has to use intonation? So as I said before, that when we are speaking, we have to observe some of the features that at the end of the day, they are going to make our utterances being understood. Remember, we are using language for communication. And if what you communicate is not understood, that means that will be meaningless for us to use language to communicate. But now, using language, we cannot just use it the way we want. There are some guidelines that a person has to observe, just like rules. That when we are speaking, we are using sounds. And contrarily, when we are writing, we are using letters. It is very easy for a person to communicate, especially the language that he or she has been grown up with. I'm talking about the native language. Because the rules and or other principles, they are inborn. That you automatically find yourself, you know them. Think of yourself as you speak Kiswahili as your native language. You can use the language to communicate whatever feelings that you have. But here today, we are looking at English language. The language that we happen to come across it when we are in schools. And in this case, there are some interferences of our first language in speaking this language. And that is the reason I bring this forward to you today, to see how best a person can use these prosodic features to make his or her utterances being understood. Just before we go to them, you know, as I said before, when we speak, we are using sounds. We produce sounds. Sometimes we learn them and we practice them. But sounds by themselves, they are meaningless. They only become meaningful when they are put together. Now, when you put them together, there is a way on how you can pronounce that word. English words are different from Kiswahili ones, because the way a word is pronounced sometimes it's not the way how it is written. So this inconsistency or this mismatch between the pronunciation and the spelling sometimes somehow make most people fail to pronounce English words. So the moment you fail to pronounce the word as it is supposed to, it is very likely that whatever you're going to say might not be understood to the second party. And especially if you're talking to a native speaker of this language. Think of this word, for instance. Dear students, how do you pronounce this word? As a Swahili speaker, and probably many of us, we think the word is pronounced as onion. That you just pronounce the way as it reads. But If you are talking to a native speaker of English, when you talk about onion, you won't understand one another. He'd keep on asking himself or herself, what is it that you're trying to communicate? So starting from the proper pronunciation, its proper pronunciation, how do you pronounce that? It is pronounced as an onion. Onion. Can you say onion? So that is the way how you pronounce this word. So as I said before, when you are to speak or when you are to communicate using English, you should first of all using proper pronunciation. If you miss that, you will definitely be speaking a language of your own and not English as it is supposed to. After you have mastered the way the sounds are supposed to be pronounced, this is when now you're going to see how can you make those words meaningful. When we speak, when we communicate, we don't communicate using individual words. We are using words in a string, connected words. Now, how can we make these prosodic features applicable in our speaking? You have pause. What's a pause? And how do you pause? A pause is a short break. It's a short break when you are speaking. We cannot just speak continuously as we connect these words. That it is believed after every word there should be a short break. That when you make those short breaks, when you are speaking, you are in fact trying to make the other person being able to follow and at the end of the day understands what you communicate. Think about, for instance, look at this sentence. This sentence contains words, as you can see the way it is written. When I speak these words, after every word, as I write, you can see there is a space in between. So similarly, when we are speaking, you cannot speak by joining these words. You make a short break at least after every word, as I said, so that you can give space to your friend who is listening to be able to follow and finally understand what you communicate. Imagine the same sentence or the same words, you find somebody has written them like this. No spaces in between the words. If you are told to read, how fast can you read it? Of course, it will take you some time to make the demarcation between the words, so that at the end of the day, you come across with this text and therefore you'll be able to understand. So that's why I say, even when we speak, we need not to speak very fast to an extent that we don't give ourselves enough time to understand and being able to follow what is being communicated. This is the feature that can make a person understand what is being communicated. Yeah, as we say about pause, that when you look at the way how these words have been connected without some spaces in between, that it makes a person difficult for him or her to follow what it has been written. But as I said, it will take some time for this person to start making some demarcation between these words, and as a result, he or she might have a sentence that reads like, Juma is going to school. So this becomes easy when you have words with the spaces in between. And in most cases, when we read and or when you speak, we speak in this way when we are making formal presentation, that we speak distinctive words so that a person can easily follow and understand. But there are times when people enter into a conversation that when they are speaking, they cannot speak as they use words individually. That there are some features that they have to accompany whatever they say, and in that case, you find the words are connected. Let us now examine another example sentence. Now, this sentence reads as, the answer is simple if you read the words individually. But for the smooth transition and for the conversation to sound natural, if at all, this is one of the utterances that a speaker could make, and especially a native speaker. We find there are times when there are some sounds which we have to insert in between some words, and there are some sounds which they have to sound differently from the way they look like in the normal spelling. And even sometimes we are forced to delete some of the other sounds or some of the other letters, especially if they are to be written. But here we are talking about speaking. When you are listening to a native speaker, you have to be very careful to observe these other sounds which are either added and or deleted, and or sometimes a certain sound can behave in a way that another sound behaves. So in a sentence like this, if a person has to speak in a smooth transition and for a sound or for the sentence to sound naturally, you'll hear a person say something like, now look at the connection between the two words. That somewhere in between the first word and the second word, there is the insertion of this sound here. And altogether now, the two words sounds as the answer. The answer. Now, if we are to add or if we are to connect with the followed other word, now since this word ends with a vowel sound and the followed word starts with a vowel sound, and as long as this word ends with an R letter as its spelling, then this R, it has to sound, and which in this case, in a normal speaking, will pronounce and or will speak this as the answer is. So the answer is becomes a smooth and a natural way on how this expression or this utterance has to be heard. So what we have seen here is that there is an insertion of this here in between, and also there is this R. At this point, I would name this as a linking R. And we call it a linking simply because it is there already in our original and or in our sentence. That is a second example of where we see there are some sounds which have been inserted and or there are some sounds which they act as a linking sound and we are speaking. Again, we can also examine, for instance, another expression or utterance that reads like look at this. Or if you read these individual words, the sentence will read as, if you are happy and you know it. Now, as I said, when we are speaking and or when you come across with this as a verse in a poem, how are you going to sing it? How these words are going to be connected in a smooth transition and or in a natural way on how this expression can be heard. You'll find a person speaking as, now look at the three words, they would read as ifya, ifya. So this if, you take the O of it, and this you will only be represented by the ya, and that a will be represented by the shwa. So ifya. So if you're happy, and so now look at how does this word and sounds. This word would of course sound as an, which at the beginning it was supposed to have those other sounds. Now because of this natural and or smooth transition of what I said before, we simply leave the sound n as a connector. And you finally remain with these other expressions. Now, I want you to be very careful looking at the last two words. No. This ends with a vowel sound. And this one begins with also a vowel sound. Now, when we want to connect this, we should not be tempted of thinking about the intrusive R. Now, since because the last sound in this diphthong is U. So whenever we come across with U as a last sound in a diphthong, that tends to have a glide. That tends to form or to insert a glide in between the two. So at this point, we'll instead insert this glide w, and altogether the two words will read as know it. So if I have to read the whole expression, it could read like, if you're happy and you know it. So in this case, I just want to draw your attention by, you might hear a person speaking a word which you might have never heard it before anywhere. And when you go to a dictionary, you might not even come across it, simply because there are some sounds which have been inserted in between. Now, if you are not aware with all those, that is the time when a person will find difficulties to make follow of what is going to be spoken or what is spoken. This is another example of how we can insert some sounds. Now look at this expression which you might have either heard and or you might have spoken it as well. The two words, moreover. Now as we speak or as you hear one speaks, you can't find him or her say moreover, but instead you'll find him or her speaking something like moreover. So moreover, at this point, you have inserted the R, which differently from the previous and that we have seen, this one is what we call intrusive R. Intrusive R. So the R wasn't there, but we have inserted just because of to meet the purpose of how the two words can be connected. So we have seen there's intrusive R, we have seen there's a linking R. But again, we have seen there's the insertion of this ya and wa. All these, they're trying to make our speech sounds naturally. But there's one more other which I would also want to draw your attention. It's like there are times, look at this for instance. The two words read separately as 10 men. Now in speaking, sounds, they are spoken by different organs of speech. So there are sounds which, when they are spoken, the organs of speech that are used, they are closer by, such that when one sound is spoken, it tends to have a quality of the other sound. And in that case, in speaking, we find the behavior that the followed sound has, it is more or less the same behavior that the previous sound has. So it's like one sound trying to take the qualities of a previous sound. So in speaking, we call this assimilation. So the traits which are in one sound are being taken to the other sound. Look at this one. We have this sound as 10. This one as men. Now, as you can see, the last sound and the first sound, this one is and this one is So you find the alveolar is very closer to the bilabial, and apart from it, they are both nasal. So when we are to speak the two words in connection, then you'll find someone would speak something like this. And in that case, you'll find this one is not heard. And as a result, you'll find someone say something like temen. Temen. So this is what we call assimilation. My dear students, and so this is what I would altogether call them as some features which we normally use and some native speakers use when they are speaking. So if you want to be a good listener in that matter, we have to practice this and see how best we can identify and be able to follow what it is communicated. A pause sometimes help to make expressions being understood differently. You might find there are some words which, when you pronounce them without making a pause in a proper area, you find, or you may find yourself talking about something which is different from the one that you have intended to. Think about these two words. What if you find a person decided not to observe a pause in between the two words, and instead he or she connects them? So instead of you talking about forest, you talk about forest. Now it is only a pause that can make the two expressions different in terms of meaning. Think about these two expressions as well. You talk about ice cream and you talk about ice cream. Now, apart from pause, in English, you have this word length. Length, you're talking about the duration that a person spends to produce something. You can use a long time or you can use a short time. that will depend on the nature of the sounds that you are to pronounce. There are some sounds in English which they seem to be a bit similar, but you can discriminate them by using length. Think about these words. How can you pronounce these two words? The first one, you pronounce it as ship. But the second one, you pronounce it as sheep. Now look at what you have in between the two consonants. The same sound E. How do you discriminate them? How do you discriminate them? This one is ship, and that one is sheep. Now, when you are communicating, if you fail to observe the time that you are going to spend in producing these sounds, you'll find the two words sound the same. And so a person who is listening, provided he or she, maybe if she or he is a native speaker of this language, then again he would be putting some question marks, asking himself, what is it that you are trying to communicate? Another example you can have is like this word, pot. And look at this other word. How do you differentiate the two when you are speaking? You can only differentiate the two by observing the time you spend in producing these sounds. This one, you'll talk about pot, while this one, you'll talk about pot. So since in Kiswahili, we don't have this sound discrimination, then as we are now speaking English, in order for us to make what we are trying to communicate meaningful, then a person has to observe this. There are a lot of words which it is only the length of the vowel sounds that can differentiate the meaning of the two. When you write, of course, there's no problem because they differ in the spelling. But when you speak, you find almost all sounds are the same. But the only thing that makes them different, it is the time you spend in producing them. Think of any other two words which seem to be similar in the way we pronounce, but they are only differentiated by the time you spend in producing the sounds. Can you think of one? Okay, let me help you, give you one more. How do you pronounce this? This is pull, but the other one is pool. And you can think of many more other words now. But what I'm trying to say here is, why do we have to observe this, not only to make sound discrimination, but they are meaningful things, they are meaningful expression that you have to observe in order to make the words understood. Let us also examine these two other words, bid and beat. The two words, as you pronounce, you'd find they have similar nuclear. The E, the long one. But when you speak the two words in a smooth transition and O, when we speak the two words, you find one of them is spoken with extra length. And this extra length is caused by the context in which the sound appears. The sound I'm speaking here is this one, bid, and this is bid. Now, when the two words sounds, someone might be tempted to say they are more or less the same. But the truth is, this one, it has an extra length. And this extra length is caused by the context. What kind of context? It is said that when a vowel is followed by a voiced coda, and or when a vowel is followed by a voiced sound, that vowel will tend to be lengthened. So it is at this point when we say this one has been lengthened simply because of this voiced. Contrary to when the same sound is followed by a voiceless coda. And in this case, we are talking about what is called contextual length. That the vowel has been made longer simply because of the environment in which it occurs. In comparison with some other vowels which might be also long, but because of the environment or because of the context in which they appear, they find themselves being heard not the same as those which are which ends with a voiced sound. Let's now look at how important stress is in our communication. What is stress? It is just an emphasis that a person has to apply when speaking. It is the extra energy that you apply when you pronounce a syllable. Now, when you use extra energy, or when you say you put an emphasis in producing a syllable, that means that syllable will be heard louder than the other. Sometimes it can be heard longer than the other. And in that case, that syllable will be referred as a stressed syllable. Look at this word. Look at this word. How do you pronounce this? We pronounce this as referee. It is referee. So the last syllable, it is the one that will be heard louder comparing to the other. And so we call this as a stressed syllable. But when this is a stressed syllable, then the other one will be referred as unstressed syllable. So a stressed syllable is the one which is heard louder when you are speaking. We do not speak these words constantly. There has to be the up and down as we speak. Sometimes it is the one that creates rhythm in our speaking, that can make what you say attractive. It's like you're making some beats. Think of another word like this one. How do you pronounce this? This one, it is pronounced by having put a stress somewhere there. We call it ambiguity. Ambiguity. So what I'm trying to say here is stress as a meaningful feature, it is there in all languages. But the stress pattern is not the same in all languages. In Kiswahili, for instance, we have stress as well. But the stress pattern in Kiswahili is different from that we have in English. Kiswahili, we put stress on the last syllable but one. We call it penultimate syllable. The last syllable but one. Or the second syllable from the last. For instance, maybe I should give you one example. This is the last syllable and this is the second from the last, and so we put our stress on that syllable. You say it is anacheza. Anacheza. Or think about a stress there. That becomes chakula. You can't put a stress on the first syllable. You can't say chakula. No, we don't speak in that way. And in case you cannot even say chakula. No. That a stress has to be on the second syllable from the last. But this is quite different from English. That a stress position varies from one word to another. For example, we have this word referee, as we said, maybe. We said we put a stress on the last syllable. But when you come across a word like this one again, where do you put a stress? The word reads establish. So you put a stress on the second syllable. A word like this, for instance, if you want to put a stress there, becomes export. So we can see the stress positioning differ from one word to another. So in this case, one has to practice. One has to know the exact place where a stress has to be put. We don't just put a stress anywhere we like. And if we do that, we are going to distort the meaning of what we are going to communicate. So as I said earlier, it is easier for a native speaker of English language to have mastered all these. We as the speaker who speak this language as a second language, we are not used with these stresses. And that is why it is important for us to practice them. You find the listener all the time keeps on asking you, pardon, pardon, pardon. No, you start asking yourself, is it that you don't know English language? You know it. You know the words. But how do you pronounce them? That is the thing that could make the differences. But this stress, it has several functions. Why do we have these stresses? As I said, stress in English word varies. So at time, a stress can perform this function. As a function of a stress, that stress tries to indicate which syllable should receive a stress and which one should not receive a stress. For example, you have a word like this one. Now, which syllable receives stress and which one does not? So if I have to pronounce this word, I will finally find it is this syllable that has to receive a stress, and this one will also have to receive a stress. So it is examination. So it is the second syllable that has to receive a stress, and the second from the last, which also has to receive a stress. So in that case, as a referential role, in this word, we can now see that there are syllables which are stressed and others are not stressed. In as far as speaking is concerned, these which are not stressed, we call them weak syllables. We use less energy to pronounce them, and again, they are heard low in comparison to the stressed syllable, which are heard louder. And in most cases, when we pronounce them, they take short time. The second function that a stress performs in our speaking, that of distinctive role. Distinctive role. That it is through the use of stress where a person will be able to identify and distinguish two words which are alike. That, you know, when we are speaking, there are times you can see there are words which are closer, more or less the same. But it is through the stress that can make the distinction in terms of the meaning. Think about the word important and then the word important. Now, with these two words, someone might try to think that you are speaking and or you are making the same word. But the truth is, the two words are different. Of course, in writing, it is easy for you to differentiate the two words. So the normal spelling, they can differentiate. But when it comes to speaking, you'll find this is important and this is important. So the sounds, they are more or less closer. But it is through the stress that can make the distinction in terms of the meaning of the two words. That is distinctive role. You can have another function of a stress that performs syntactic function, syntactic role. That it is a stress that can make word categorization. That a stress can indicate in which word category does a word belong. And we are talking about word category here, we are talking about the word classes. There are some words in English which you can differentiate them in terms of their word category according to the stress that you can make. For example, you have these words. These words can be categorized in two different word classes. One is a noun, and the other one is a verb. How do I make it? Export, export. So it is the stress shift that has changed the word class of the original word to. That has changed the first word from it being a noun to the second word, it being a verb. Talk of a word like present and present. It is again a stress that had made the first word to read as a noun and the second one to read as a verb. So in fact, it is not only changing the word category, but it also changes the meaning of the two words. So we can talk about syntactic role vis-a-vis semantic role as well. So it is the stress that can show the change of the meaning of one word to another word. If you stress at the first point, the meaning of this word will be different from the meaning of the second word when you stress on the second position. Apart from syntactic role, stress also emphasizes information that the speaker wishes to communicate. It is said that it's not all words that a person speaks that carry the meaning that a person intends to present. It is a word that will suggest what the speaker wishes to communicate. So that word which the speaker suggests, that word which contains the message which the speaker wishes to communicate, it is said to be spoken louder than the rest. And in this case, we talk about it being emphasized. So we talk about it being stressed. How do we say it, for instance? You might come across somebody asking a question like, how so if a person asks a question like, how did you get lost? Now it depends on which one, or it depends on what is it that make you got lost. So the answer could be, like this one. Now, how you read it? So if a person, for example, wants to emphasize that the message should be on this word, so it will read like, it was dark night. So that means it was at night, but the emphasis there, it was about what? Dark. So it was completely dark. But if a person doesn't believe, then someone say, it was a dark night. So what I'm trying to say is, when we are speaking, there is a new information and there is a given information. So the new information is the one that has to be spoken a bit louder than the rest. Apart from that, we have another function of stress, which is called demarcation role. Demarcation role in a sense that sometimes when we speak, we tend to slightly separate some of the words that we want to make. When, for instance, you are trying to introduce someone, you'll first of all call his or her name. For example, you say, Frank, meet my friend Yusuf. So when you read this sentence, you find the first word, Frank, will be heard louder. And after that, you put a short break. And then the other expression follows. So what I'm trying to say is, this word Frank is slightly separated from this other expression. And as you speak it louder. And the last function of stress in this discussion is that of making whatever we say sounds more attractive. Talk about rhythm. What's rhythm? It's like the beats of up and down, as it attracts somebody to keep on listening something. So when it comes to speaking, as our expressions contains the stressed and unstressed syllable, and as we all aware that when you talk about a stressed syllable, it is a syllable that has to be spoken higher than the unstressed syllable. So a combination of stressed and unstressed syllable in an utterance, it can create the up and down movement of our sounds as we speak. And that is what we call rhythm. You can easily identify rhythm in poems, but not necessarily in poems because of those sound devices, but even in our normal speaking. The sentence that we had, Juma is a sentence like this. The first now, when you look at this one, the first word, it has 2 syllables. And it is the first syllable that should be heard louder, and the one which is stressed. This one, as a minor word class, it doesn't receive a stress. When it comes to this one, again, it is this one that receives a stress, not this one, and of course, the last one. So you'll have the up and down, and so this one constant, then up, down, and so on like this. Now, try to look at this is up, down, up, down, up. So that is what we call rhythm. So when we speak, as we have a combination of stressed and unstressed syllable, we find ourselves, our sounds goes up, down, up, down. That is rhythm. And all these. So dear students, we can see now how important stress is in our communication. That failure to observe stress in performing these functions, automatically what we are trying to communicate or what we are going to communicate might not be understood by the people whom we are talking. Having seen pause, length, and stress, let us talk in short about intonation, because we have already dealt with it sometimes in one of the revision classes. What is intonation? Intonation, it has to do with the rising and the falling of our sound quality when we are speaking. That when we speak, we don't talk, or our voice is not constant. There's a time you find a person is speaking by raising his voice or her voice, and there's a time you find a person is speaking by falling down his or her voice. But all in all, the aim is to communicate. So in this case, we want also to establish what effect the intonation brings in our communication. So whether it's rising and or it's falling, it has something to do with communication. So if you can remember back, sometimes when we speak, as we said, we have to express our feelings. And it is through intonation where a person can understand in which state someone is. If you find a person is speaking by raising his or her voice unnecessarily, then you know this person is angry. But at the moment you find a person speaking when he or she is very down, then you know he or she is sad. So that is attitudinal function. So another way of how intonation can tell someone, it is when people are communicating. As we are communicating, we are exchanging the turn of speaking. So it is intonation that allows a person as to whether he or she take off and or you find or you leave a space to a person who is speaking. So in this case, I'm talking about if a person has finished his or her turn of speaking, and or if the person is still maintaining the turn of speaking. So raising the voice, that shows a person is still maintaining the turn of speaking. But falling, that indicates finality, and so it allows another person to take off the turn of speaking. But also, at times, you find people are rising and or lowering their voices simply because they want to make people attentive as they listen to whatever he or she says. So when you are speaking to people, for instance, you find yourself, you raise your voice. What effect do you want to achieve? You want to draw attention of those people. They start asking themselves, oh, why is this person raising the voice? So at that time, when they are asking themselves why, that is the time when you deliver the message that you wishes to. And oh, if you make your voice very low, so that means those people who are listening will increase their attention. And as a result, you achieve the purpose of the message that you want to deliver. So here we're talking about stylistic reason. That which style a person has decided to use to make his or her message reach to the audience. And lastly, we talk about emphatic function. When you speak, it's not all the words that they carry the message that you wish to communicate. So it is at this point when the speaker now has to organize his or her utterance, trying to see the new information, try to see where he or she can place the new information. Is he going to place the new information at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end? Now, if it's at the beginning, that means that new information will have to be spoken in a higher voice, will have to be spoken with a rising tone. And if it is somewhere in the middle, then again, that part, it has to be spoken with a rising tone. And if at the end, of course, again, it has to be spoken with the rising tone. So at this point, you'll have either the falling tone, the rise and the fall, and or the rising tone. So this is what and how I can explain about these prosodic features. That when we are speaking, we really need to observe them because the intention might not be achieved if at all we miss one of these. Otherwise, if you speak without observing them, you find yourself you are not communicating because the meaning that you wanted to present will never be understood by the second party. Thank you very much for listening. Keep on watching Darasa Online.